3 monks disappeared from this abbey in 1989. Their beds were still warm. Their dinner was still on the table. The candles in the chapel were still burning. But the monks themselves were gone. No signs of a struggle. No footprints in the snow. No blood. No bodies. Nothing. For 6 months, local police searched the surrounding forests, caves, and valleys. They found nothing. The case was eventually closed. The official explanation was simple. The 3 men had left voluntarily. Most people accepted that explanation. The few who didn't slowly stopped talking about it. Then, 36 years later, something happened. A hiker became trapped during a snowstorm near the ruins of St. Alaric's Abbey. While sheltering beside the outer wall, he recorded a short audio clip on his phone. He claimed he could hear singing coming from somewhere beneath the building. At first, nobody believed him, until an archivist from the local historical society compared the recording to an old cassette discovered in police evidence. The voices matched perfectly. The same melody, the same 3 voices, the same recording pattern, the same men who had vanished in 1989. The problem was obvious. Those voices should not have existed anymore. My name is Daniel Mercer. I am a researcher specializing in abandoned religious sites and historical disappearances. I first heard about St. Alaric's Abbey on a rainy evening in February. 3 days later, I was standing at the edge of the forest that surrounded it, and if I had known what was waiting beneath those stones, I would have turned around and driven home. The road ended nearly 2 miles from the Abbey. From there, I had to continue on foot. The forest was silent. Not normal silence. Not the quiet of winter. This felt different. As though the woods were listening. Snow covered everything. The trees stood motionless beneath a gray sky. No birds. No animals. No wind. Only the sound of my boots crushing frozen snow. The Abbey appeared gradually through the fog. At first, I saw only its bell tower. Then, the ruined walls. Then, the shattered stained glass windows. It looked less like an abandoned building and more like a wound in the landscape. The structure dated back to the late 12th century. For hundreds of years, monks had lived there. Records describe the Abbey as isolated but peaceful. Pilgrims once traveled from across the country to visit it. Then, over time, fewer people came. The surrounding villages grew smaller, roads changed. The Abbey became forgotten. By 1989, only 3 monks remained: Brother Thomas, Brother Gabriel, Brother Michael, the last caretakers of St. Alaric's Abbey, the last people ever known to live there. I stopped beneath the main gate. The iron doors had long since collapsed. Snow drifted through the entrance. Inside, darkness filled the corridors. I took a flashlight from my backpack. The beam cut through decades of dust. Immediately, I noticed something strange. The air smelled fresh, not abandoned, not decayed. Fresh, as though someone had opened a window only hours earlier. I told myself there was a reasonable explanation. There usually was. At least, that's what I believed back then. I entered the Abbey. The silence followed me inside. The police reports described the disappearance in remarkable detail. The monks had eaten dinner together on the evening of December 14th, 1989. At approximately 9 o'clock, a nearby farmer reported hearing church singing. Nothing unusual. The monks sang every evening. The next morning, a delivery driver arrived with supplies. He found the main entrance open, the dining hall still lit by candles. 3 bowls of soup sitting on the table. Half-eaten, still warm. The driver initially assumed the monks were somewhere in the building. After several hours, he called authorities. The entire Abbey was searched. No one was found. The reports contained one detail that fascinated me. A statement from an officer named Richard Haynes. According to Haynes, he had discovered fresh footprints in a lower corridor beneath the chapel. The footprints ended abruptly at a stone wall, not turned, not doubled back, ended, as though the person walking had simply vanished. The note appeared nowhere else in the file. No explanation, no follow-up, just one sentence. I intended to find that corridor, if it still existed. The chapel stood near the center of the complex. Its roof had partially collapsed years earlier. Moonlight filtered through broken stone arches. Rows of wooden pews remained surprisingly intact. At the far end stood a blackened altar. I walked slowly through the room. My flashlight moved across faded paintings and cracked stone. Then it stopped. Someone had recently placed candles near the altar. I froze. They were not ancient. They were not covered in dust. They looked new. One of them appeared partially melted, as if it had burned within the last few weeks. I crouched beside it. The wax was soft. Not much, but enough. Someone had been here very recently. A cold sensation crawled up my spine. I suddenly became aware of how alone I was, or at least how alone I hoped I was. That was when I heard it. A voice, faint, distant, somewhere below me, singing. One long note, barely audible. Then silence. I stood completely still, listening. The sound never came again, but I knew what I had heard. And for the first time since arriving, I considered leaving. I spent the next hour searching every room connected to the chapel. Most had collapsed decades ago. Others contained nothing except broken furniture and scattered religious texts. Yet the feeling that someone was nearby never disappeared. Several times I found myself turning around unexpectedly. Each time, there was nothing behind me. Only empty corridors, only shadows, only silence. The strange singing never returned. But another sound began to replace it. Footsteps. Not clear footsteps. Not loud. Just the faint impression that someone was moving somewhere beyond the range of my flashlight. Whenever I stopped walking, the sound stopped too. Whenever I moved again, it returned. Slowly, patiently, following. I eventually discovered a narrow staircase hidden behind a damaged section of wall near the rear of the chapel. According to the original architectural plans I had studied before arriving, no staircase should have existed there. Yet, there it was. The steps descended into darkness. A cold draft rose from below. The temperature seemed to drop immediately. I aimed my flashlight downward. The beam disappeared into blackness. For several moments, I simply stared. Something about the stairway felt wrong. Not dangerous, not threatening. Wrong. Like a detail in a photograph that doesn't belong but takes a moment to notice. Finally, curiosity won. I began descending. The stone steps continued much farther than expected. 30, 40, 50 steps. The deeper I went, the quieter the world above became. Soon, I could no longer hear the wind outside, nor the creaking structure of the Abbey. Only my breathing, only my heartbeat. At the bottom, I entered a narrow corridor. The walls were covered with ancient symbols. Some were religious, others were not. At least not any symbols I recognized. Many had been scratched directly into the stone. Some appeared centuries old. Others looked fresh, painfully fresh, as if carved only days earlier. I photographed everything. The corridor eventually opened into a small chamber. The room contained a wooden desk, a chair, several shelves, and something that immediately captured my attention. A journal. It lay open beneath a layer of dust. The leather cover had nearly disintegrated. I carefully picked it up. The first pages were unreadable. Moisture had destroyed much of the text, but the later entries remained intact. The handwriting belonged to Brother Thomas, one of the missing monks. The final months before the disappearance had been documented in remarkable detail. At first, the entries were ordinary: weather reports, maintenance work, daily prayers. Then everything changed. An entry dated October 3rd, 1989 read, "The singing returned tonight." I frowned. Returned? The word suggested it had happened before. I continued reading. Brother Gabriel heard it first. We believed it was coming from the chapel. We were mistaken. Another entry. October 11th. The voices are beneath us. October 19th. We searched the crypt. No source found. October 27th. Michael claims the voices know our names. I felt a chill. The entries became increasingly erratic. The handwriting grew shaky. Paragraphs ended abruptly. Some pages contained only single sentences. November 8th. The fourth voice has joined them. November 15th. We do not speak of the fourth voice. November 21st. It sounds familiar. I turned the page. December 1st. Tonight, the singing came from inside the walls. December 5th. Gabriel heard someone calling him from beneath the altar. December 7th. We sealed the lower passage. December 8th. It did not help. I swallowed. The final entry occupied an entire page. December 14th, 1989. The last day the monks were ever seen. The handwriting was barely legible. The ink had been smeared as if written in panic. I read it twice, then a third time, because I could hardly believe what it said. The voices are no longer beneath the chapel. They are beneath us. We understand now. The singing is not calling us downward. It is calling something upward. At the bottom of the page, one final sentence had been added. The words were pressed so deeply into the paper that they nearly tore through it. If anyone finds this journal, do not answer when they sing. I stared at the page. The chamber suddenly felt much smaller, much colder, much darker. Then my flashlight flickered once, twice, and went out. For a moment, complete darkness swallowed everything. I cursed and reached for my backup light. My hands trembled more than I wanted to admit. The second flashlight switched on instantly. Its beam swept across the room. The desk, the chair, the shelves, then the far corner. I froze. Someone was standing there, a tall figure, motionless, watching me. The light struck its face. The figure vanished. The corner was empty. I blinked. Nothing remained. No footprints, no sound, no movement, just stone walls. I told myself exhaustion was affecting my perception. Stress, isolation, the atmosphere. Anything except the alternative. But deep inside, I already knew I hadn't imagined it, because a second later, I heard something moving in the corridor outside. Slow footsteps, approaching, one step, another, not hiding, not sneaking, walking directly toward the chamber. And then I heard a voice, soft, almost gentle, singing. Not one voice, not two, not three, four. 4 voices singing somewhere beyond the doorway. exactly as Brother Thomas had described 36 years earlier. And one of those voices sounded disturbingly close, as if it were standing just outside the room, waiting. The singing continued, soft, slow, almost beautiful. That was the worst part. It didn't sound threatening. It didn't sound demonic. It sounded human. 4 voices harmonizing somewhere beyond the chamber. A hymn, ancient, melancholic, familiar. The kind of song you might hear in a cathedral at dusk. For a moment, I found myself listening instead of thinking. The melody seemed to pull at something deep inside my mind, like a forgotten memory, like a dream I had once had and nearly remembered. Then I recalled the final line from Brother Thomas's journal. Do not answer when they sing. I immediately backed away from the doorway. The footsteps stopped. The singing continued. The corridor outside remained hidden in darkness. I could see only a few feet beyond the entrance. Nothing moved, nothing appeared. Yet I knew something was there, listening, waiting. A sudden crackle erupted from my backpack. I nearly jumped. It was my digital recorder. The device had been switched off, yet its indicator light was glowing. Red, active. I stared at it. The recorder began playing audio. At first, there was only static, then voices. My own voice. I froze. The recording was impossible. It was me speaking, inside the Abbey, describing the staircase, describing the hidden chamber. The problem was obvious. I had never recorded any of those words. The device continued playing. My voice sounded calm, steady, as if reading from a prepared script. Then it said something that made my blood run cold. I found the lower chapel. I had never seen a lower chapel. The words continued. They are waiting for me here. I took a step backward. The recording went on. There are 7 of them now. 7, not 4. 7. Static filled the speaker. Then came a final sentence, spoken in my own voice. A sentence I had never said. I should not have answered. The recorder shut itself off. Silence returned. For several seconds I simply stood there, unable to move, unable to think. Then the singing stopped. Instantly. All 4 voices vanished. The silence that followed felt unnatural, heavy, almost physical. And that was somehow worse, because now I could hear something else, breathing, very close, somewhere in the corridor. Slow, deep, human breathing. I aimed my flashlight toward the doorway. The beam illuminated empty stone. Nothing more. The breathing continued. I stepped closer. The sound stopped. Again. Nothing. No one. No movement. No figure. Only darkness. Then I noticed something on the floor. Footprints, fresh footprints, leading past the doorway. The snow outside could not have reached this chamber. No dust had been disturbed anywhere else. Yet these prints were clearly visible. Dark impressions on the stone floor. I crouched beside them. They appeared wet, as if whoever made them had been walking through water. I followed them into the corridor. The prints continued ahead, one after another, perfectly spaced, calm, unhurried. Eventually they reached the far end of the passage and stopped, exactly as Officer Haynes had described in 1989, directly in front of a solid stone wall. I examined every inch. No hidden doorway, no cracks, no hinges, nothing, just ancient stone. Yet the footprints ended there, as though their owner had simply walked into the wall and disappeared. A cold sensation settled into my stomach. Then my flashlight revealed something I had initially missed. A symbol carved into the center of the wall, unlike the others. Newer, deeper, recently cut. I brushed away dust. Beneath it were words. 4 names. Brother Thomas, Brother Gabriel, Brother Michael, and a 4th name. A name I didn't recognize. Father Elias. I searched my memory. There had never been a Father Elias in the records, not in the police reports, not in the Abbey archives, not anywhere. Yet the name had been carved alongside the missing monks, as if it belonged there, as if someone wanted it remembered. Then I noticed something even stranger. Beneath the names was a date. January 17th, 2025. The date from the hiker's recording. The date the singing had supposedly returned. A sudden realization hit me. Someone had been down here. Recently, very recently. I wasn't investigating an old mystery anymore. Something was still happening beneath St. Alaric's Abbey, and someone or something was maintaining it. A low vibration passed through the wall. I stepped back. The stone trembled again, not much, just enough to feel. Then came a sound, a faint metallic click. Deep inside the wall, something moving. Ancient mechanisms groaned beneath the stone. Dust fell from the ceiling. Before my eyes, the wall slowly began to slide sideways. My flashlight beam entered darkness beyond. A hidden passage. The air that emerged was freezing, far colder than the surrounding corridor. It carried a smell unlike anything I had encountered before. Wet stone, old earth, and something else. Something faintly familiar. Food. Fresh food. I don't know why that terrified me, but it did, because suddenly I remembered the police report. The warm soup, the unfinished meal, the monks who had vanished in the middle of dinner. The passage fully opened. Stone steps descended into blackness. Far below, somewhere beyond sight, a voice began singing. Only one voice this time, a male voice. Clear, strong, close. Then another joined it. Then another. Then another. 4 voices. 5, 6, 7. The hymn rose from the darkness beneath the Abbey, and for the first time, I recognized one of them. It was the voice from the impossible recording. My own. For several seconds, I stood frozen at the top of the hidden staircase. My voice continued singing from somewhere below. Not a distorted imitation, not something that merely sounded similar. It was my voice. Every tone, every breath, every subtle inflection. Perfect. The realization struck with a force that nearly made me lose my balance. I had arrived at St. Alaric's Abbey less than 8 hours earlier. How could something beneath the Abbey know my voice? The hymn continued. 7 voices now, moving together, rising from the darkness like a slow tide. Part of me wanted to run, to leave the Abbey immediately, to get back to my car and never return. But another part of me needed answers. That part won. I began descending. The hidden staircase was far older than anything above it. The stone had been worn smooth by centuries of use. Moisture dripped from the walls. My flashlight revealed carvings unlike those in the upper corridors. Hundreds of names covered the stone, thousands perhaps. Some were centuries old, others looked recent. I stopped beside one section. Many names had dates beside them. Some dated back to the 15th century, others to the 18th, others to the 20th. The final entries were recent, very recent. One caught my attention immediately. Father Elias, January 17th, 2025. The same date carved above. Below it were 6 additional names. I read them carefully. None appeared in any historical records. None belonged to monks. They seemed ordinary, local names, tourists, researchers, travelers, people who had vanished without attracting national attention. Then I saw something that made my stomach tighten. At the bottom of the list was a blank space, an empty line, as though another name was waiting to be added. I forced myself to continue downward. The singing grew louder, closer, more distinct. The melody echoed through the stone like a living thing. Eventually the staircase ended. The space beyond was enormous, far larger than anything that should have existed beneath the Abbey. My flashlight swept across towering pillars, arched ceilings, ancient stonework. It looked like an underground cathedral, a hidden church buried beneath the monastery. the lower chapel, the place mentioned by the impossible recording. Rows of wooden benches stretched into darkness. Most had rotted away long ago, yet some remained intact. At the far end stood an altar. Candles burned upon it, fresh candles, dozens of them. Their flames flickered softly. Someone had lit them recently, very recently. The singing stopped the moment I entered. Silence returned. I moved forward slowly. My footsteps echoed across the vast chamber. The altar came into view, and I immediately understood why the monks had disappeared. Because they had never left. 7 wooden bowls rested upon the altar. Steam rose from them. The food was hot, freshly prepared, exactly as described in the police reports. 7 places set for 7 people. 7 spoons, 7 cups, 7 chairs, as though a dinner gathering had only just begun. The candles illuminated something behind the altar. Portraits, large oil paintings hanging upon the stone wall. I approached. The first painting showed Brother Thomas. The second showed Brother Gabriel. The third showed Brother Michael. All 3 appeared exactly as historical photographs depicted them. Yet the portraits looked new. Fresh paint, fresh canvas, as though completed only days earlier. The 4th portrait showed Father Elias, a middle-aged priest with pale eyes and a severe expression. The 5th showed a young woman. The 6th showed an elderly man. The 7th showed me. I stopped breathing. The portrait was unmistakable. My face, my clothing, even the scar near my left eyebrow. Details impossible for anyone to know. Especially impossible because the painting looked years old. I staggered backward. A terrible realization began forming in my mind. The 7 voices, the 7 chairs, the 7 portraits, the 7 names. Something beneath St. Alaric's Abbey wasn't collecting bodies. It was collecting people. Then I heard movement behind me. I spun around. The chapel remained empty. Or at least I thought it was empty, until my flashlight moved toward the benches. Figures sat there, motionless, watching. Dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, their faces hidden in darkness. I hadn't seen them before because they had not been there before. Now, every bench was occupied, every seat filled. Silent observers staring toward the altar, toward me. The flashlight trembled in my hand. None of the figures moved. None spoke. None breathed. They simply watched. Then one stood, slowly. A tall figure wearing dark monastic robes. The hood concealed its face. Another rose. Then another. Then another. One row after another. The entire congregation stood together, hundreds of silent shapes filling the underground cathedral. The air suddenly felt colder, much colder. Then a voice spoke from somewhere behind the altar. Calm, ancient, human. Brother Thomas. One of the robed figures stepped forward. Brother Gabriel. Another moved. Brother Michael. A third. The unseen voice continued naming them, one after another. The congregation responded, not with words, with song, a single note. Then another. The hymn began again, and as each name was called, another voice joined the choir. The sound grew louder, stronger, deeper, until the entire underground cathedral vibrated. The voice behind the altar continued. Eventually, only one name remained, a name not yet spoken, a name I already knew was coming. The singing stopped. Silence spread across the chamber. Then the unseen voice spoke again. And this time, it called my name. Daniel Mercer. The congregation turned toward me as one. Every head, every face, every eye. And for the first time, I realized they weren't looking at me. They were waiting for my answer for several seconds. Nobody moved. The congregation remained perfectly still. Hundreds of figures stood among the ancient benches, waiting, watching, listening. My name echoed through the underground cathedral. Then silence returned. The voice behind the altar spoke again, calm, patient, as if it had all the time in the world. Daniel Mercer. I forced myself to speak. Who are you? The answer came immediately. That question has been asked here for 700 years. The voice sounded neither old nor young, neither male nor female. It carried an unsettling quality, as though many voices were speaking together, layered, merged. I took another step backward. The congregation watched. Not one figure moved. Not one blinked. Not one breathed. The voice continued. Every person who entered St. Alaric's Abbey asked the same question. My flashlight beam swept across the nearest figures. Their faces were finally visible, and what I saw nearly shattered my sanity. Some were monks. Others were not. Men, women, young, old, people from different centuries, different eras, different lives, all standing together beneath the Abbey, and every face carried the same expression. Peace, not fear, not suffering. Peace. That terrified me more than anything, because it meant they had stayed willingly, The voice behind the altar spoke again. "You believe this is a place of death." I said nothing. "You are mistaken." A candle extinguished itself. Then another. Then another. Darkness slowly crept across the cathedral. The congregation remained motionless. "You call it disappearance." Another candle died. "We call it arrival." The temperature dropped further. My breath became visible. The voice seemed closer now, as if whatever was speaking had begun moving toward me. I could hear footsteps, slow, measured, hidden behind the altar. I tightened my grip on the flashlight. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to run, to escape while I still could. But another realization suddenly emerged. The names on the staircase, the portraits, the recordings, the singing. The Abbey had never been haunted. A haunting implied something left behind, something trapped, something unfinished. This was something else entirely. The people beneath St. Alaric's Abbey weren't prisoners. They were residents. The monks had not been taken. They had joined. Then I remembered the journal. One sentence, the final warning. The singing is not calling us downward. It is calling something upward. My blood turned cold. I finally understood. The monks had misunderstood the threat. Whatever existed beneath the Abbey was not trying to pull people below. It was trying to come above. The voice behind the altar stopped walking. Silence returned. Then something stepped into view. I wish I could describe it clearly. I have spent months trying. I still can't. Because every time I remember it, the details change. The shape was human, and not human. A priest, and not a priest. Ancient, impossible. Its face seemed to shift every second, sometimes old, sometimes young, sometimes male, sometimes female, sometimes familiar, terribly familiar. For a brief moment, it wore my face. Then it changed again. I staggered backward. The thing smiled, not maliciously, almost kindly. "Now you understand." The congregation began singing again. The hymn echoed through the underground cathedral. The thing stepped closer. "You came here seeking an answer." Another step. "And you found it." Another. "The question is whether you can leave with it." Then something happened. A sound erupted somewhere above. A distant crash. The entire structure trembled. Dust rained from the ceiling. The thing paused. The congregation fell silent. For the first time, uncertainty crossed the faces around me. Then another tremor struck. Stronger. One of the stone pillars cracked. A section of the ceiling collapsed in the distance. The Abbey above was failing. After centuries of decay, the structure had finally begun to collapse. The thing looked upward. So did the congregation, and suddenly nobody was watching me anymore. I ran, I turned, and sprinted across the cathedral, past the benches, past the candles, past the staring figures, toward the staircase. The hymn erupted behind me, louder than ever before. Hundreds of voices, thousands. The entire underground chamber seemed alive. I reached the stairs. Stone exploded somewhere behind me. The ground shook violently. I climbed. Faster, higher. The singing followed, growing louder, closer, almost directly behind me. I risked one glance over my shoulder. I wish I hadn't. The congregation was ascending, not walking, not running, ascending. Hundreds of figures moving upward through the darkness. Silent, fast, far too fast. The thing with the shifting face stood among them, watching me, smiling. I climbed harder. The staircase seemed endless. The hymn filled every corner of the passage. The sound became unbearable. Then suddenly, I emerged into the upper corridor. The hidden wall had already begun closing. Stone ground against stone. The opening narrowed. I threw myself through. The wall sealed shut behind me. Instantly, the singing stopped. Complete silence. I collapsed onto the floor, breathing hard. Sweat soaked my clothing despite the freezing temperature. For several minutes, I remained there, unable to move, unable to think. Eventually, I forced myself to stand. The Abbey continued trembling. Sections of the ceiling collapsed around me. The building was dying, and I intended to leave before it took me with it. I reached the main entrance just as part of the bell tower collapsed into the courtyard. Snow exploded into the air. Stone shattered. The entire structure groaned like a wounded animal. I ran. I never looked back, not once. Hours later, I reached my vehicle. By sunrise, I was gone. By sunset, I had convinced myself the nightmare was over. I was wrong, because St. Alaric's Abbey wasn't finished with me. Not yet. 3 months later, demolition crews arrived at the site. Their goal was simple: remove what remained of the ruined abbey before it collapsed completely. The work lasted 6 days. On the 7th day, the foreman filed a report. According to the report, workers discovered a hidden chamber beneath the chapel. The chamber was completely empty. No congregation, no altar, no portraits, no candles, nothing. There was no evidence anyone had ever been there. The official conclusion was that no underground cathedral existed. No supporting evidence could be found. My photographs had somehow become corrupted. My recordings contained only static. Every piece of proof had vanished. Every piece except one, the original audio recording from the hiker. The recording that started everything. Experts analyzed it repeatedly. The result never changed. 7 voices could be heard singing beneath the Abbey. Not 4. 7. Exactly 7. The report remains sealed to this day. Most people have never heard of St. Alaric's Abbey. Most never will. But every winter, during the first heavy snowfall, locals still report hearing singing in the forest. The melody remains the same hymn, the same voices, the same impossible choir. And last week, an archivist contacted me. He had discovered a photograph taken by one of the demolition workers. The image showed the ruined chapel moments before the final collapse. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. Then I noticed the altar. There were 8 bowls on the table. Not 7, 8. The 8th place setting appeared recently prepared. And beside it, someone had carved a fresh name into the stone. Daniel Mercer. The photograph was time-stamped 6 days before I received it. 6 days ago. The problem is simple. I have no memory of where I was that night. And for the past 3 evenings, I've been waking up with mud on my boots, along with a song I cannot stop humming, a song I have never consciously learned. Yet somehow, I already know every word.